really a lack of access to government services. And that goes with collecting data from indigenous peoples. So we might not actually know it yet, but there could actually be probably more than 260 million indigenous peoples in Asia. There could be more because of the lack of aggregated data. So Asia is very diverse in terms of its indigenous peoples, and in general as well. The culture is diverse, there are a lot of languages. In Asia alone, there are 2,000 distinct groups of indigenous peoples with varying language, culture, and governance systems. And in our network, we usually divide them into 4 subregions. So you will notice South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and then Central and North Asia. So we can see that there are 2,000 distinct groups. However, many of these groups, that could be more, are not actually legally recognized by their governments. So for example, in India, there are 700 plus ethnic groups in India, and many of them are actually recognized as indigenous peoples, but there are many more that are categorized into what we call scheduled tribes, which does not necessarily mean, or which does not recognize them as indigenous peoples. In the Philippines, we have the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, which legally recognizes our right as indigenous peoples and our right to ancestral lands. But again, it is very ineffective in actually implementing all of this that is written in the law. And it actually established a very, very oppressive institution, which is the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. And ironically, it is actually one of the main violators of our rights. In Myanmar, their government will say that all of us are indigenous peoples. And that may sound good, but actually, that kind of attitude towards indigenous recognition dismisses the application of what we call the UN DRIP, or the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So by not recognizing the groups as indigenous peoples, you are basically violating their right and blocking them from access to all of these laws that we have and policies that we have worldwide that can help our communities. So Asia does face a range of interconnected challenges that stem from historical marginalization, ongoing development pressures, and I listed down here just some main issues or key issues that the Asia indigenous peoples in general are facing. So this includes the youth. And actually, if we look further, this does not only apply to indigenous peoples, right? It's actually something that a lot of us are facing. So for example, we have land rights and displacement, which comes from land grabbing, the building of extractives like destructive dams, large-scale mining. We have discrimination and marginalization, which from our consultations with the youth is a really, really big issue right now, culturally and economically. We have cultural erosion, which actually stems from the fact that the youth do not get to live in their ancestral lands anymore. And they begin, and as we know, as indigenous peoples know, our cultures are rooted, no, in where we live, in our ancestral land, and that's why we call it cultural erosion. We have limited access to culturally sensitive education. I think a lot of us will resonate with this, that this comes hand in hand with discrimination as well, in which we, indigenous youth, indigenous peoples are usually portrayed as the savages, no, in the mainstream education, usually in our systems. And we have economic exclusion, poverty in our communities, political underrepresentation, climate change and environmental degradation, and also violence and criminalization. So these are all challenges actually that we face worldwide. It's not exclusive to indigenous peoples in Asia. but it is severely exacerbated in in it is exacerbated in the experiences of indigenous peoples who already face historic marginalization and still face this as well. So all of these interconnected challenges impact how the indigenous youth of Asia are connected to their lands, to their culture, and to their identity. Given the advancement in foreign technology and assimilation to non-indigenous cultures. As we always say in the Asia Youth circles, we are balancing between what we call the traditional culture and the incoming technology from outside our land. So it is always a thin line between having to juggle between becoming the quote-unquote modern person and then also being able to revitalize our culture. So it also gravely impacts the role of indigenous youth as the torchbearers of the IP struggle, leadership as indigenous peoples, and also the guardianship of our lands. So our network, the Asia Young Indigenous Peoples Network, serves as a platform Asia-wide for indigenous youth organizations to be able to actually become part of the solution to all of the problems that have been listed. So I will just give a short background there, but this is not, this is not the venue for me to pitch out my organization. But I would like to list what has been done in regards to the history of the organization. So AYIPIN, Asia Young Indigenous Peoples Network, was established in 2017 as a result of a 2002 event, so quite long ago, called the First International Indigenous Youth Conference. Today it is one of the widest reaching here in Asia Youth. We try as much as possible to include every indigenous organization, be it national network, a regional network, but we also want to include grassroots level organizations to help with their development as well. So I also wanted to show what the current IP youth landscape looks like here in Asia. So we have AYIPIN, but we also have the Asia Indigenous Youth platform under the AIPP, or Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. And we do have overlapping people, overlapping calls, overlapping objectives. And also, we have quite a few more indigenous youth, Asia youth mechanisms that are helping hand in hand for forwarding the calls of the Asia indigenous youth. So these are actually, in these bullet points, you can see here the priorities of the Asia youth that AYIPIN has reached. So this could be limited to the people we have reached out to, but we try our best as much as possible to be able to get a bigger scope of what it looks like here in Asia. So we have a pressing need for youth training or development capacity in general. We have the need on the training on human rights. I have listed the problems we faced a while ago, and a lot of our Asia youth are actually quite active as well in their own regional, in their own local organizations, in the human rights scene. And a lot of them have already experienced human rights violations. And I think that comes in hand with what the indigenous peoples are facing, which is why there is a really big need for human rights training such as documentation, legal empowerment, and paralegal needs, like how are we able to support ourselves in a time when we are facing violations. We also have the need to actually increase the members of our network. If we want to try to get a bigger look, or if we want to be more comprehensive in what Asia is actually facing, we need to have a wider scope, which is why as much as possible, we try to connect with each other. And there should be no discrimination between the organizations of Asia, indigenous youth, because we are all facing the same problems. Okay. All right, so we are moving on to the increasing challenges with the indigenous youth of Asia. So we are facing a lot of disconnection from our ancestral lands caused by displacement, urban migration, land grabbing. And it's actually, we actually have something good going on already because the indigenous youth of Asia have their own programs, have their own movements, which we broadly call Back to the Roots. Back to the Roots, which means that we are calling for more indigenous youth to come back to their ancestral land, to come back to serve their communities. Like for example, in Indonesia, I think you have the Homecoming movement, and in the Philippines, you have the Balik Ili program, which are all basically the same concept of having to go back to where we were, to our ancestral lands, to serve our own communities. So we also have another problem on the lack of culturally sensitive education systems that we mentioned earlier. And I think here in the bottom left is something major which our lives are already threatened because of the land grabbing that we are facing, by the militarization that comes with, because as we know, with the big corporations, the corporations that bring in the dams, the mining, the ecotourism projects, all of this, they will usually come with their own military or their own private guards, which impose on the communities of indigenous peoples. And with the presence of the military, usually there is the presence of human rights violations. It's hard to set those apart and to see the correlation because it does happen and it has been in our reports for a lot of times. All right, so actually, I don't think I need to go through the articles of the UN DRIP. I think in our own